Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to continue today with this series 3 of the circular economy and medical device reprocessing, a roadmap for new solutions, series of webinars. So today we will have the last webinar of the year, where we will talk about the health technology assessment in the circular economy of the medical devices. Before you get introduced to our moderator notes for today, I would like to share with you some housekeeping tips and rules for you to have a great webinar experience. First, please make sure you switch off any non-essential applications on your device that which may be taking away for you the internet bandwidth. And like the Outlook, the browser windows, for example, or the internet. If by any chance during the webinar you experience any video disturbance, we recommend that you please refresh your browser, or you go out and log in again just to come back to the session. Today's webinar will start with a 35 minutes presentation, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session, and we will conclude the webinar with the key take-home messages and introduce you to the next webinar topic and speakers. This webinar will finish in 1 hour to respect everybody's agenda. If you have any questions for the presenter which are not answered during this presentation, please make sure you type them on the chat box on your right of the screen, or if you are using a mobile device, you can find it on the bottom part of your screen. In order to make this presentation more interactive for everybody, there will be several live polls from our speaker that you can answer to our presenter questions. So please take use of the few seconds that will be provided to you for you to vote in order to engage and make it more interactive. One last point, this webinar will be recorded, and the link with the replay will be sent to all the registrants shortly after we finish. Now it's my big pleasure to introduce you the moderator for today, Dr. Carlos Paulos, that is also our scientific director for this ASP Summit CME webinars 3rd series. For those that have joined previous webinars already know him. So Carlos, welcome again to the ASP Summit CME webinars series 3, and thanks for joining today. I hand over it now to you.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. Hope that you are well. As John said before, this is the last webinar of the year, and the last webinar of this series will be on January, as we'll tell you in a few minutes. So for today, we have very interesting attendance with a wild dispersion in terms of geographic location. And we have colleagues from South Africa, from the Middle East, and as usual, from Europe, the Portuguese are the most present. And in terms of professional characterization, we can see that most of you are nurses or healthcare managers, and also the decontamination and lead managers, which is very interesting. So we are here with a very wide range of professionals. And so it's my pleasure to announce you this new webinar for today. So the role of health technology assessment in the circular economy of medical devices, which is really important. And as you probably know, because engineer Jonathan Hart was also with us in the previous webinar series, and engineer Jonathan is the head of technological innovation and health technology assessment at the Policlinic Universitario Campus Biomedico in Rome, Italy. And well, you know, he has a degree in electronic engineering and biomedical engineering. He's a senior hospital management staff, more specifically a medical director's office. As you can see there, the roles on purchasing of medical equipment, budgeting and cost tracing, healthcare operations and operating room management, clinical performance and outcome indicators, and hospital layout and workflow design. So it's my big pleasure to have you. So the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for this introduction. I'd like to thank ASP for inviting me and especially for organizing these very interesting webinar series, and in particular this webinar series on such a relevant topic as circular economy, which is relevant to everyone for the global environmental issues that we all know about. And it's very important to bring the conversation of circular economy into healthcare management. So we'll go through a few in-depth through more specific discussions today. Let me share my presentation. Here we are, full screen. So we'll see what health technology is and what role it can play in circular economy and healthcare. We'll see how circular economy is a way of meeting supply chain requirements in the healthcare industry. And we'll see in the application of circular economy principles how these compare and according to what criteria they can be introduced compared to current linear economy practices, and all the different variables that must be kept in mind in the choice of adopting single-use devices or instrument versus reusable instrument. So we will begin with seeing what the role of HTA is in circular economy. And we'll begin with this question. So I ask you, the audience, to say how health technology assessment can contribute to healthcare circular economy. So whether this is through environmental sustainability or impacting patient safety, making evidence-based decisions, or through economic sustainability. So I'll just wait a few more seconds for all of you to provide answers. There isn't necessarily a correct answer, but it's interesting to see what is the best option. So I'll end the poll now, and I'll share the results. So it's interesting to see how most of you opted for patient safety, which is always at the utmost importance in healthcare. But we must remember that we are talking about environmental sustainability and economic sustainability, and that HTA is an instrument for making evidence-based decisions. So I'll close these results sharing, and we'll move on to the next slide. So let me move on to the next slide. A classic definition of health technology assessment is that of being a bridge between knowledge or evidence and decisions, so that it is a way of providing measurable, unbiased evidence to decision makers. So HTA must always answer the question on how a technology compares to another under different domains. So we can see how this multidimensional approach is developed through many domains. So it's let's say the current use, technical, safety, clinical effectiveness, as well as cost or economic, ethical, organizational, patient and social, and legal. So when answering the question on what is the difference between a technological solution and another, all these different aspects must be kept in mind. So that's why HTA is a methodology which is made possible by different professionals working together. As a definition, it's important to say what we mean by technology. So, as I said, it's a systematic evaluation of properties, effects, and influences on technology, and it addresses direct and indirect consequences. This is a definition from the International Agency of HTA of 2014. What is also interesting is to see that in the new definition of HTA, and I remind you that by technology, we don't only intend a drug or a device, but it can be a procedure, an organizational solution, or any type of intervention in healthcare. Among, as we see in note 3, highlighted by this arrow, it is also environmental aspects are also to be kept in mind. And so this is very important. What's also important to keep in mind in the role of HTA is among stakeholders who are healthcare managers, healthcare decision makers, which means members of parliament, members of government, members of national or international agencies, healthcare providers, researchers, manufacturers, patients, and the public. There is, according to some studies, a matrix which shows that pertinence, relevance, and weight are decreasing, as shown in the graph on the right. So prioritization, evaluation, and estimate decrease with pertinence, relevance, and weight going from healthcare managers to the public. So what is interesting is that discussing circular economy and environmental sustainability or global climate change issues in healthcare, we are changing the weight in the matrix by bringing the public, meaning society and media, to be more relevant. So let's say moving them up from the bottom right corner of the matrix on the right. So there's mutual influences among the stakeholders in HTA. As we can see in the graph on the left, regulators influence industry, the industry influences hospitals with the technology available, it influences professionals, payers and hospitals mutually influence each other, and patients and health professionals also have bi-directional relations with all the other players on the board. And in this scenario, it's interesting to think of HTA as a methodology or a player who can steer and direct the propellers of this motor, who are industry, research, and institutions, both by showing the path to follow and by providing evidence to make sure that the decisions are made in the right directions. Now we will see the second topic, which is how circular economy is relevant for meeting supply chain needs. So the question I ask you now is, why is circular economy necessary in the healthcare industry? Again, once again, select the best option among economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and to meet service requirements. So I'll wait a few more seconds for all of you to answer. Okay, I'll end the poll now and share the results. As we can see, most of you answered half and half, let's say the same weight of economic sustainability and environmental. And few answers have been in favor of service requirements, which is interesting. And we'll also see why. I'll close the results sharing. And now we'll move on to the next slide. So what is happening in the supply chain? So you all answered rightly, correctly, that economic and environmental sustainability are important. But let's see what's happening in the supply chains. So what's happening is that there's a widening gap between demand and availability. And this is because of rising costs of material, rising costs of energy, scarcity of natural resources, and a general unavailability of meeting demand by the markets. And so this is why hospitals, including my own, are facing back orders or stock outages by suppliers. So this means that circular economy is also a way of sustaining the supply chain, because in a scenario where demand is exceeding availability, there is a need for solutions that spare resources, natural resources, and avoid there being stock outages and back orders, which are always to be avoided, but especially in healthcare, which cannot afford to have interruptions in the supply chain, because it is of vital importance, as we all know. So here are some more slides where we can see how the pandemic influenced, with these peaks in 2020, the supply chain by creating supply chain disruptions. There's a downwards peak in the chart on the left, which corresponds to the upwards peak in the chart on the right. But even though the pandemic has passed, the supply chains disruptions remain. So they are not only due to pandemic, but they're due to the phenomenons that we saw in the previous slide. So there is a need in healthcare, just as in the economy, other economies, for new business models. So we all know, and we're all very careful in our day-to-day life to use reusable bottles to fill up with water, or shopping bags for the supermarket. And we're also aware of manufacturers trying to extend the product life of smartphones, for example. We've seen how there's been an increase in the second-hand automotive market, and so on. And so we need to think of all the ways that these can be applied to healthcare. So resource sharing, and any model that is able to reuse or remanufacture or update the parts, the devices, or parts of the devices. There has been an in-depth explanation of this in previous presentations in this webinar. So now we'll go to the third topic and see how priority setting and balancing of circular versus linear economy principles can be considered. So the question I ask you is, in the adoption of circular economy solutions in healthcare, what counts the most? Is it CO2 emissions? Is it maintaining clinical standards? Is it waste produced, or is it the cost of energy? Once again, I provided these options considering all to be relevant, and it's interesting to see how you will answer and which you will consider most relevant. So I'll wait just a few more seconds for more of you to provide answers. Okay, I will end the polls now and share the results. So we have 24% of answers in favor of CO2 emissions. Then we have 48% maintaining clinical standards, 19% waste produced, and 10% cost of energy. So I'll interrupt the sharing here. And we'll see how all these aspects are to be impact the adoption of circular economy solutions. So these charts show how we need to move from a linear model to a circular models where the value is retained, where we reuse, redistribute, refurbish, remanufacture, and recycle devices which were otherwise just used and destroyed, with all the environmental implications that we have been already discussed in previous episodes of this webinar, with incineration, landfills, pollution, and so on. And we also know that the industry of healthcare weighs a lot from this point of view in the carbon footprint. So we mentioned other examples of circular models that we are aware of outside the healthcare market, but let's consider the application to healthcare. We always must keep in mind that safety standards such as patient safety, effectiveness, outcomes, and infection control remain unchanged. So it's very important to do life cycle analysis of processes and devices. It's very important to do an economic study. It's very important to represent the carbon footprint and be aware of that. And all these should be elements which are part of the multidimensional aspects that HTA considers in evaluating or promoting a new alternative in healthcare. So these must always be kept in mind. So an example which is emerging in the industry is the solution offered by hybrid instruments, which in the comparison between single-use and reusable are, let's say, a way in between, where there is which seem to offer higher performance or a better user experience, because in the linear economy models, which we are all healthcare professionals are used to, there is the conviction that single use is better, it's more effective, and has a better performance. So the combination of single-use components with reusable components, making hybrid instruments, seems to be a good solution from the effectiveness or user experience of surgeons, as well as an extremely good solution from the carbon footprint point of view. You can see how the carbon footprint of clip appliers, laparoscopic scissors, and ports or trocars is very much lower in hybrid instruments compared to single-use instruments. In this slide, we can see a chart that represents and classifies all the infection risk, reprocessing, and regulatory requirements of medical devices. These are divided into non-critical, semi-critical, and critical. The area in which there can be an important shift from single-use to reusable is that of semi-critical devices. That is, intermediate devices that require intermediate or high-level disinfection with chemical disinfection. such as endoscopes, laryngoscopes, tongue blades, etc. In the section of critical devices, there is normally either a consolidated use of single-use instruments in case of implants, or reusable instruments in the case of surgical instruments. So, as we said, the carbon footprint is made of many aspects, which we will have a closer look at. And those are the water use, they are the CO2 emissions, electricity, which also involve transport, the waste produced, or the gas burnt, and also the personnel and the movement and all the other fuel which is used throughout the life cycle from production to transport and use of any device. So here's an example of how healthcare professionals are, thanks to their awareness and being sensitive to the problem of sustainability, have proposed, in this case it's in the case of endoscopy, solutions for reducing, reusing, and recycling in their own clinical setting. So obviously reducing unnecessary procedures, trying to shift to paperless reports, use cold snares rather than thermal ablations, reduce the use of single use, to going through very simple solutions such as LED lights or turning off computers when unused, and so on. Reuse where possible, and also recycle also the materials. This also, according to local regulations, may have its complexities, because there may be contamination from drugs, from biological tissues, and so on. So recycling always must be evaluated carefully in compliance with regulation. Let's see how all these can be adopted. This is a proposal of how these steps can be taken by reviewing, researching, and reinventing. And this is a pyramid that shows how the different stakeholders that we saw at the beginning of the presentation have a different weight or role. So we've seen these examples are promoted by individuals who are at the base of this pyramid. And then the pyramid narrows, moving up hierarchically through the units, and then hospitals, and then regions, nations, and international regulators or governments. And what is the key for the success of circular economy models to take on is for them to be promoted both bottom up by single initiatives and top down. And it's very hard for them to have success if they are not being promoted both ways, because the demand will also stimulate the industry to provide solutions, but also the regulations can stimulate the industry to provide circular economy solutions. And the industry itself has to see the opportunity of meeting the new requirements, as well as being responsible for the global issue. Here is another example of how professionals are being aware and involved in promoting circular economy and carbon footprint reduction. On the left, we see how once again, the endoscopy professionals have singled out specific solutions for minimizing carbon footprint, and how in England, with a green surgery challenge, there is a growing awareness among surgeons of finding solutions and also making other colleagues more sensitive to the same issues. And at the end, we'll see how single-use versus reusable device choices can be made and what to keep in mind when choosing one or the other. So the question I'll ask you is, which organizational aspect is more important in the management of reusable medical devices? Is it the adoption of reusable versus single-use instruments? Is it the choice of high versus low temperature technologies? Is it the choice of on-site versus off-site reprocessing? Or is it set optimization and sizing? So I'll wait for a few more answers to come in. Once again, as in the previous polls I prepared, all answers are relevant to the question, so I don't believe there's a wrong answer, but it's interesting for the discussion to see which is the one that you consider most important. So I'll close the poll now and share the results. So according to the audience, the highest impact is in the choice of reusable versus single-use instruments. Then come the choice of high versus low temperature technologies for reprocessing, then set optimization sizing, and then on-site versus off-site reprocessing. So let's see how all these aspects can impact circular economy adoption. Let's go back to the slide. Okay, in this chart, we can see the tremendous difference there is between the carbon footprint of a single-use duodenoscope versus reusable duodenoscopes. So we all know and believe that reusable have much lower CO2 emissions, but this is just how much they change and how much the impact of single-use instruments, especially when they can be avoided, as in the case of duodenoscopes, which single-use devices have become popular during the COVID pandemic because of the fact that duodenoscopes are so hard to clean. But this is how much one outweighs the other. In this case, we can see the impact, the environmental impact of drapes and gowns in the single-use non-woven fabric versus textile solutions. So, as we can expect, the reusable solution have a much lower impact on CO2 emissions, but the production of the reusable have a lower impact, but the production and the reprocessing of the reusable ones, as well as transportation and energy consumption, are not to be forgotten. What's interesting is also extending from measurable to non-measurable variables. Both manufacturers of both non-woven single-use fabrics and textiles claim that their solution is the best for the environment. And the reason for which single-use non-woven fabric drapes and gowns claim to be more sustainable is due to the fact that, and this variable is not in the charts we are seeing now, they reduce infections. So by reducing infections, they reduce medical complications, hospital stay, and all the rest of the employment of other devices or procedures which also have their own CO2 footprint. So once we begin to measure the carbon footprint or do a life cycle analysis, this can be extended far beyond the direct use, as well as onto indirect consequences, which is one of the things which HTA has to be very careful about. Also to be considered in this solution are the organizational factors, such as how many are being used, or how is the hospital layout, or how does the choice or use of one or the other impact staffing. So there is not really a correct answer, and this should be evaluated on a case-by-case situation. Move on to the next slide. Another question, the option I gave you in the poll, is how the loading optimization can impact emissions. And so we can see how here in the case of washer disinfectors and steam sterilizers, how the optimization of loadings can impact the carbon footprint. And so loading efficiency on the chart on the left, we can see how loading efficiency at 100% has a carbon footprint which is proportionally lower to 25%. Also, how the instruments are packaged. So rather if they're in a rigid container or in a tray wrap or individually wrapped, because of the filling of the equipment and the impact of the packaging, this type of optimization also has a big impact. And when we see the carbon footprint, which is represented here, we should also be seeing the cost, because the cost is proportional in terms of energy and resources used. On the left, we can see a chart that shows in detail all how instrument sets which are individually wrapped versus sets go through the process in the machine loading, and on the right we can see how the impact of streamlining instrument sets on the carbon footprint and cost of decontamination in packaging shows at changing the number of instruments per set. So it's also important from staff time to not to have exceeding instruments, surgical instruments within a set, which are not necessary. So standardization is important. As we just mentioned, when we see CO2 footprint, we should also be seeing cost of electricity and water, which, as we all know, starting from the bills we pay at home, is steeply increasing. And for this reason, the other option I gave you in the poll, which is high temperature versus low temperature sterilization, is also extremely relevant. So we know that low temperature sterilization with hydroperoxide gas plasma has a lower energy consumption, does not use water, and also reduces the effect of the wear on instruments, and so therefore prolongs their life. So once again, this is another relevant aspect of management. Also, the instrument maintenance and repair is important because preventative maintenance has a lower impact on repair, and the way instruments are repaired effectively also depends on how many instruments a central sterilization department has, because the sizing is key to being able to perform preventative maintenance in order to have fewer out of house repairs, which also means maintaining higher clinical standards because instruments are more efficient and performing as they should. Another aspect which has been deeply discussed in a previous webinar is how the choice of on-site and off-site influences the emissions and impacts all aspects of circular economy. And once again, the choices need to be made on case-by-case basis. So since 35 minutes have passed, and I'd like to end punctually, these are the take-home messages. So we saw how HTA is a multidimensional methodology to allow a comprehensive and evidence-based approach to circular economy applications. And it's a way of appraising whether devices or solutions are proven to be environmentally sustainable are also clinically effective and acceptable. So it's important to assess how circular economy models compare to current practice in terms of clinical outcomes and effectiveness. So this is what we need to add to what we already know and to what has already been said in the previous speeches in this webinar. So life cycle analysis and economic evaluations alone do not provide conclusive evidence to decision makers. HTA can help defining requirements which need to be met by industry, institutions, and healthcare professionals in developing and applying circular economy solutions. So I have in mind that image of HTA steering the three propellers of the stakeholders. And we also saw how important it is for that the growing awareness among healthcare professionals and scientific societies is changing the game. But it is also important for there to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach, because change is made if everyone at all levels is involved and promoting change. So with this, I have finished, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Jonathan. It's always very interesting to have you to hear your talks, and I think that we have in fact a long way to go in terms of changing the concepts and the practices moving towards the circular economy. I can ask you some questions that are made by our attendees. One of the questions, I think it's very interesting, because in one of the slides it is written that there is a planetarium primum nocere principle, which is very interesting because it's the extension of the concept of doing no harm between the relationship between physicians and patients and nurses.
Well, yes, as I showed at the beginning of the presentation, how the international HTA agencies have brought environmental issues into the multiple aspects, adding those to the traditional social, ethical aspects. We should be aware as citizens of the world that we should not be harming the environment. I mean, it's obviously important not to be harming the patient, because patient needs to be cured. It's important that treatment is ethical, is equal. But in doing this, we can no longer afford to not consider the impact this has on the environment, because in the end, I think there was a very interesting slide by Dr. Faludi. So, and that was about the patient in the room and everyone else outside the room. So as we are curing the patient in the room with at a very high carbon footprint, all maybe future patients outside are being exposed to pollution, to toxic waste, to incineration, to effects of landfills, and so on. So we, as citizens of the world, we can no longer be forgetting these aspects. And just as we are aware as citizens, and we are careful to recycle and throw out plastic with plastic and paper with paper, in healthcare, there's a growing awareness of all these aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and in your personal experience, do you feel that the industry or the healthcare workers are starting to have some changes in terms of thinking on incorporating the 3 Rs and the concept of circular economy?
Yes, I'm seeing this happening, especially among healthcare professionals. Our team of surgeons with the Society of Italian Surgery, following international societies, is promoting green surgery awareness.
The concept of green surgery, yes.
And as a university, we are going to be starting a study on the carbon footprint of surgery with our Faculty of Engineering. But this has been brought up by our surgeons. So health professionals are aware. Personally, but I wouldn't like to make this a general statement, I haven't seen the same awareness on the part of the industry. As a hospital, we tend to opt for refurbished instruments. For example, it's interesting to consider how in a new instrument, like a new endoscope, costs 3 times more if it's new rather than if it's a refurbished instrument bought in the repair exchange formula. So let's say that by saving 2/3, we are also saving the environment. So we do make this solution, we make this choice when possible. But I'd like to see more on the part of the industry. But this is only personal. I wouldn't like. I may be wrong, or my perception may not be completely representative of the way things are.
Mm-hmm. Another very interesting issue is related with the supply chain. So, how do you think that the difficulties that we are facing now, and we will face probably more in the next few months, because of the war and also because of some consequences, some delayed consequences of the pandemic, how does these difficulties will push or difficult the implementation of the circular economy?
Well, I think in the end, the unavailability of products will force us into new solutions. What's important, I think, is that we should not find ourselves to be forced into thinking of solutions, last-minute solutions, but that we should be prepared. So it's hard to do this without the participation of the industry. So what we are doing now to keep our supply chain resilient is having alternative devices or producers that we can purchase material from if our principal supplier has a back order. But that isn't a solution. because we are staying in the linear economy and we are just competing. For instance, just today we've had we know that the producers of the ceiling devices for electric surgery have had issues in production because the factories had problems with plastic supplies. So this is just one case. So for now, we can opt to buying an alternative or equivalent product, but that is not making it circular. So we need to be thinking in advance of ways that we do not rely on linear economy, but we shift where we can circular solutions. So we are not forced to call off surgery or diagnostic or other therapeutic procedures because we don't have the material we need to perform them. This is something that healthcare cannot afford to do. So we need to be thinking ahead and keep our eyes open and do horizon scanning and think of solutions, ask for solutions, advocate for solutions. So this is to answer your question.
Yeah. Yes, you did. So we will close now the Q&A session. It's a pleasure to count on you again. And
thank you.
I appreciate a lot your talk. And I now am going to give the stage to Jaime to finish the webinar for today. So thank you very much. And for my side, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a New Year, and Happy New Year, and we'll see you again in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Paulus, and thanks also, Engineer Art. And thanks again for this insightful presentation. I hope it has been also beneficial for our audience today. Thanks, Dr. Paulus, for moderating this webinar. Our next webinar, as Dr. Paulus was saying, it will be next year. So just 1 second. And it will be a roundtable. So it will occur in January 26th, same time. And in the roundtable about the circular economy in medical device reprocessing, a roadmap for new solutions, we will count with all the speakers from this series 3, Professor Lindsay, Engineer Jeremy, Professor Victoria, Mrs. May, and Engineer Art. They will be all together, not only having a discussion among them, but also allowing for the last time, so last chance for all participants to raise their questions, their odd questions and concerns, how they can apply the circular economy on the daily basis in their departments. Registration will opening soon, so stay tuned for our upcoming communications. As you know, and as a reminder to everybody, we have recorded our webinar, as we mentioned at the beginning, and we will share the replay link after. In the email that you will receive, so you all will receive, so the persons that have been registered will receive an email with several assets that you can get access to it. One of the things that we would like you to do in order to keep improving our webinar series is to perform the survey on this specific webinar number 5 with Engineer Art that we just have been participating with. So please don't forget to, if possible, to invest 2 minutes of your time and to tell us how can we improve and share about your opinions about this webinar. After that, after you submit, you also will receive a download link where you can download your participant certificate. And I think better than that, you can have access to the resume of this webinar and the key takeaways on the fact sheet that will be also available for you. So thank you all for your participation today. I take this opportunity as Dr. Paulus to wish you all a lovely and peaceful holiday season. And I hope to see you soon on January 26th, same time, with all our speakers for our roundtables. So wish you all a lovely week and happy holidays for everybody, and see each other in next year.